Welcome to the Remote Work Podcast, where we explore the evolving landscape of workplace flexibility and employee experience. In today's episode, Tim Keefe, CEO of Transform-CX and SDSS Global, sits down with longtime colleague Kimberly Nerpouni, Global HR Leader at JustAnswer. Together, they dive deep into one of today's most debated workplace topics, remote work versus return-to-office mandates. Kimberly shares her first-hand experience leading the remote work transformation at JustAnswer, a 700-employee global internet company that successfully transitioned from a traditional desktop-based office culture to a thriving remote-first organization. You'll hear about the 3 critical pillars that make remote work successful, why trust and culture matter more than location, and why there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the future of work. Tim and Kimberly also explore the surprising connection between employee engagement, business success, and the often overlooked reality that 70% of the global workforce remains disengaged. From quiet quitting to A-player retention, this conversation challenges conventional wisdom about what makes teams truly productive. Whether you're a leader wrestling with work-from-home policies or an employee navigating the changing workplace landscape, this episode offers practical insights from 2 seasoned professionals who've seen it all. Let's dive in.
Hey, hi everybody. This is Tim Keefe with Transform-CX and SDSS Global, here with an old friend of mine. I'm not old from that perspective, but it's been a long time. Kimberly and I have known each other. So Kimberly Nerpouni, right? Did I got it right this time for a change?
Correct.
I'm horrible with family names. Kimberly and I have worked together for quite a few years. Actually, I was just thinking about that the other day. I think it goes back into the early 90s that we started working together. Kimberly is a very successful executive, has worked in some of the biggest consulting companies in the world, particularly in the area of employee development, employee experience. Feel free to expand on that, Kimberly, so I'll probably miss 500 things that you've done in the last 25 years. But what we wanted to talk about today was really get into the topic of work from home. And I know that a lot of people feel, oh, haven't we talked about this? Doesn't everybody know the answer? And my argument would be, we know less about the answer now than we did 3 years ago. But let me just, with that, kick it back to you, Kimberly, and say, so really, thank you for spending the time with me this afternoon. Really appreciate it. And really excited to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to talk about it. It's one of the topics that I'm, super passionate about. I work at a remote organization currently. It is a global internet company. It is 700 employees, workers strong, primarily in the US, Ukraine, and India. And remote work for us is the norm. It's how we show up. It's how we collaborate. It's how we innovate. It's how we drive business success. We are far from less than, we are actually more successful now than ever in the company's history. We were not always a remote organization. In fact, we were quite the opposite. In the early days, it was very much an in-office culture. And pre-pandemic, employees in the US were issued desktops, not laptops. That's how in-office
I'm not even sure I know. I had to stop and think about what's a desktop. Oh,
yeah,
the towers.
What you've seen, yes,
Yeah.
They still make them. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Isn't that crazy? Crazy. And so when I first started at JustAnswer, it was actually in the heat of the pandemic, depending on how you think about it, but it was January 2021. So this was about, 9 months or so into the global shutdown. Past the global shutdown was March of 2020. And I was brought into JustAnswer at the time as a consultant to help figure out the future of work. What do we want to do? Assuming this pandemic will end eventually, do we go back to the office? And so it was fascinating work. It was definitely a hot topic in January 2021. So I was thrilled to be able to work with a set of executives and a globally dispersed team to figure out what will work well for JustAnswer. Spoiler alert, we went with remote. And that meant not renewing a lease in the San Francisco Bay Area, significantly reducing our footprint in India. And then in Ukraine, that's a bit of a twist because, as I think most people know, there's an ongoing war in Ukraine. And because of that, we've chosen to keep our offices in Ukraine. In fact, we fortified them with power and technology, and that becomes a place of stability for our Ukrainian workers. So that's a unique situation, and that the physicality of that location is much needed for that population of our organization. I think the return to office mandate that a lot of companies are facing, do we not do it? It really does boils down to the company and what's right for them and their culture and, the type of work that they do and how people show up and what are their operating principles. So when I speak to remote work and its success, and I truly believe it to be a competitive advantage, I'm speaking through the lens of my experience at JustAnswer. And JustAnswer is built on a strong culture. And so that's number one. Number two, it is also built on a very trusting employee-employer relationship. And so when you have strong trust between employees and the leadership team, you're able to do things that might feel scary to other organizations. And I think when it boils down to remote work, it is scary for a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders because it's different. It's different. And because it's different, it's hard. And how I used to measure, or thought I measured, a strong workforce was the physicality and being able to see people together. And there's definitely advantages of it. And so I would never argue that remote work is better. I would never argue that in office is better. I just say that they're different and different working environments and different ways of way we show up for work are good. And you have to pick what's good for you. I will say that the foundations that make remote work productive, successful for employees, employers, and the business is really predicated on the same things that make any business successful, any company a great place to work. And that's the health of the business, of course. You got to have your revenue stream, the performance of employees, but also the performance of employers. And it is the thread of all those three pillars: business performance, employer performance, and employee performance. When all those three are running together, those three pillars are running together in the same direction, you're going to have really impressive results.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't think there is an answer that is the answer. I think it depends on the company, the circumstances, a lot of different things. Of course, technology has allowed us to do things that 10 years ago we couldn't even have done, and 20 years ago we couldn't even have imagined. But to your point, you just sit there and I'm kind of chuckling to myself. Oh, three critical pillars: ongoing business success, strong culture, and trust. How many places have you been where all three of those actually exist? And unfortunately, you and I work together in three companies. So, and I don't think any one of those three companies would fall exactly to that in being successful in all of those. One of the things that I find fascinating is we've been doing a lot of work in this employee experience stuff in our business here at Stop Doing Stupid Stuff and internationally. And it's really fascinating. We're doing a big project with a quick service restaurant in Istanbul in Turkey. And a lot of Americans would say, "Oh, yeah, they're not going to care about employee experience in Turkey. That's not their culture." And I go, "You've obviously never been there, because they do care." And in fact, the CEO of this company would tell you that if it wasn't, the people are what makes the business work. Food is there, but food is considered like, that's table stakes. If you can't make your pizza or you can't make coffee, you're not in the business. But it's how and what that experience looks like that makes it up. The other piece I thought was fascinating is this idea of trust. And we believe, or when I say we, I hate to turn this into marketing, but we inevitably talk about what we do. But at SDSS, for the last year and a half, we've been pushing a product, or we developed a product and took to market we call BalanceWise IQ. And it's a place for employees. Think about it, it's really a modern suggestion box. But they get a set of questions. It's a weekly pulse check that uses a Gallup emotional model. The intent is to get a sense of how employees are feeling about their job, their work, their coworkers, their future within that particular company across a set of attributes. And people go, "Oh, this is a great survey," and I said, "Yeah, but it's a survey." And so what's the level of responsiveness? And more importantly, do people trust that their responses are going to be handled appropriately, or is there going to be retaliation? And even more importantly, we have another client, which I can't mention who it is, but it's in the public sector. We did a pilot with them with the same product, and they were like, we need to make it anonymous, and then we need to
Mhm.
turn off all these features. Like they can't be open comments, they can't be praises, they
Mm,
can't be this, because everybody was worried
mm,
that people are going to use those to complain about people or say bad things about people or whatever. And all I could think about as I heard this conversation, and this was by a very senior executive, and I'm
mhm,
just thinking, what a dysfunctional, broken
mhm.
organization. If
Yeah.
you are so terrified of what your employees might say that you're afraid to ask,
Yes,
that and
that's scary.
and and what they also like, they'll also say, oh, we do an annual survey, we know everything's perfect, 90% of our employees are either satisfied or very satisfied working here. And I go, really? So what was the response rate on that survey? Oh,
Yes.
17%, which is
Yes.
5% better than last year, so we're doing good. And you go, okay, I think there's a check, there's somebody needs to go have a drink someplace in the middle of that, because you're assuming a way too much.
Yeah.
And what I think you're getting at, and I like, is that you have to get down to the individual and almost say, okay, so Tim, what is it you're doing? And in your role, where are you going to be the most productive to deliver on the business objectives you're responsible for, but also your contribution to the organization as a whole?
Mhm,
And I think there was an interesting corollary. We worked with a large rental car company. Again, I can't say what it was, but there aren't that many, but very large rental car company right at the beginning of the pandemic. And they were like, okay, we're all going back to the office, everybody,
mhm.
headquarters, everybody. And people were like, well, us headquarters people, we could just do our jobs from home. But and I respect the CEO, because what he said was, that may be true for those of us who have the luxury of sitting here in Parsippany, New Jersey at the headquarters,
Mhm,
that we can work from home 15 minutes away and drive, and get our work done. But what about all of our employees that handle the front desk, that park cars, that wash cars, that
mhm,
prep cars, that do road service, that make those vehicles available to our customers? They don't have the choice. They have to
mhm,
go in. So if they have to go in, we're all going in.
mhm,
And that, I think, falls
mhm,
back into your culture comment, which
mhm,
is, if people feel we're all on the same journey, we're all with the same goals and objectives, and we're all pulling together, to your point earlier, like we're pulling in the same direction, this is going to be really powerful. And I think a lot of companies lose sight of that, and they lose sight
mhm.
of the power of a promise. Again, we saw, unfortunately, the last couple of years here in the Bay Area, San Francisco, a lot of huge companies that used to use terms like family when
Mhm,
they talked about their employees, and then they go and lay 40% of the company off.
mhm.
And you kind of go, but how did you get so far out of whack that you had to lay off 40% of your company? Oh,
Yeah.
well, we made projections during the pandemic that we drew a big straight line. And I'm going, so where'd you get your MBA from again? Because I think you might want to take it back. But but the other thing too was, just, you heard this, some of the tech companies were deliberately hiring to prevent talent from going to their competitors. And so anyway, you had all this bad behavior, but then it turns around, it turns out like, oh, wait a minute, there isn't a culture of trust. There isn't a culture of we're pulling in the same direction.
Mhm,
And it gets to be, you don't care about us, we're just numbers. And
mhm,
when employees start to feel like that, then we have these great terms, which I laugh about,
mhm,
called quiet quitting. We used to call it retired in place when you and I worked in the
mhm,
phone company 30 years
mhm,
ago.
mhm,
And, it's the people who do the bare minimum so that they don't get fired. And as a result, you end up with, and I'm sure you've seen this report, every year Gallup does a employee engagement report worldwide. It's a
mhm,
fascinating report if you ever get a chance to read it, but
mhm,
it's available, it's free. I'll send you a link to it. But one of the things that this year, for 2024, the average level of employee engagement globally was less than 30%. That meant 70% on average of your labor bill that you're
mhm,
paying out in salaries and benefits and everything else is not being used effectively.
mhm,
Oh my God, that's like a
mhm,
huge problem. And then when you talk to companies about it, they pretty much give you, yeah, that's an HR problem,
mhm.
or we don't know how we're really going to solve that, or it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Or you talk to companies that are like big contact center companies, or this quick service restaurant company, where their average annual turnover is 146%.
Oh my gosh, that's insane.
Well, in the contact center industries, if you were to talk to some of the, companies, whether they're captive call centers or companies that do business process outsourcing, you'll hear numbers close to 100% on average annual turnover on a regular basis.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is they tend to be minimum wage. They tend to
Yeah.
have lots of opportunities to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
And many of these companies treat their employees as minimum wage, fungible
Expendable.
resources.
Mm-hmm.
You're expendable. There's always five more people that can take your job. Well, there really
Mm-hmm.
aren't five more people that can take your job. And you're losing your tenure, you're losing your experience, and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So I believe, and I've taken it forward into our business, that employee experience, employee engagement is an absolute critical necessity to business success. Even if you start replacing all your employees with AI, which by the way hasn't worked out the way everybody thought it was going to work out, AI is just a tool. It can be a great tool to enable people to do more, to be more effective, to get more done, but it's still a tool. And we also have the fact that we have customers, and customers, whether we like it or not, customers respond to people.
Mm-hmm.
And even when the transactions are very automated, there's still that moment in time where either I need some help or I need an explanation,
Yeah.
and we still want to go to a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And when I get to somebody who cares, who's knowledgeable, and is stopping and listening to me and has good EQ to match to their IQ, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, that's like an event changing thing. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
drives those moments of truth that we've been talking about for 35 years, which is,
Mm-hmm.
whether I stay in a hotel or I go to a restaurant or I buy a product in a store, there's always a moment that makes or breaks that event.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it comes from a completely unexpected direction. I did a short podcast a couple of years ago because I happened to be in New York, and I was staying in a hotel, and there were some problems with the room, and it could have been catastrophic, but the engineer came up and we had a great conversation and explained to me why things are the way they are. And he started bringing stuff up out of his office to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
Now, this is an engineer. This is not a front desk person. This is not the people who are normally
Yeah.
interacting with guests as part of their job. But he did an amazing job. And this is the person who now to me represents that brand in my head, is that experience.
Yeah.
So I think what I like about this conversation, Kimberly, and but I bring it to a close here, is we agree with you. I think work from home or work from office is not one or the other. It is what works. And it works for the organization, it works for the culture of the organization, but it has to work for the individual as well. And mandate one way or the other, uh, mandates are important.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't work for you, what's going to happen is you have to be prepared that, hey, maybe I need to look at other opportunities, because
That's
if you're
right.
going to sit there and be happy and unhappy and miserable,
Yeah.
I would strongly recommend don't do that.
That's right.
Um,
I mean, we didn't lose a lot of people. Most people are quite happy with the flexibility of remote work, but there's a small percentage of people that prefer going into the office,
yeah, yeah, and
So
well, and I see it. Hey, look, I like to be around people every once in a while, but I sure don't want to go into an office and sit in a cubicle and be on conference calls all day.
that's the
And
problem though with a lot of this return to work mandate stuff is so many colleagues and friends of mine just tell me these horrible stories of they're in Zoom meetings in their office because they have to be in the office. And some of the same people that are in the meetings are in the office, but everyone just stays at their desk.
well, I have a good friend. He's a senior executive at a bank in New York, and he has to badge in 5 days a week. This is a senior vice president at a bank, and you're kind of like, what message are you sending your employees about their trust? And then they're putting in all these like counter tools to make sure you're at your desk. They're talking about key counters on your
Oh,
keyboard to make
goodness.
sure, and you're like, oh my God. So you got to have trust, you got to have culture, you have to have a successful business. But I think the two that I think I really love that you brought up is culture, which is about communication, right, in my
Hmm.
mind, and trust. And when
Hmm.
employees trust that there's a safe place to speak and that people will listen and act on that in a responsible way, that
Hmm.
can change everything.
Hmm.
When they don't
Yeah.
have that, that's when I think things start to fall apart.
It starts to fall apart. And, just one final thought as you think about this from a, high performing team perspective. I think every CEO I've ever worked with has said, I want to build a high performance culture. I want A players, right? Guess what? A player knowledge workers need to feel trusted and respected. And mandating where and how they work usually isn't going to work for them. And if it does, it's only for a short period of time.
Right. Right.
Because A players know who they are. And they're highly marketable.
And yes, they're the first ones to leave when when
Mhm.
things start to go sideways.
Yes.
Absolutely. And that's what, I tell companies, and look, I've lived through many waves of this stuff, and you watch companies go, oh, we're going to do a layoff, right, because of whatever economic change, and you kind of go, okay, but recognize that you've just burned the trust of the next generation of people who would come and work here, because they know
Mhm.
this could happen to them. Or the
Mhm.
minute you announce a layoff, what happens? All your qualified people, they're gone. They're the first ones out the door because they're immediately hireable. And who are you left with? You're left with the people who don't have options, who don't have networks, who don't have the skill set. So your employee engagement plummets. Sure, you got your cost savings back, but now
Mhm.
your employee engagement and your productivity have probably gone from
Mhm.
60% to 20%.
Mhm.
Oh, and on top of that, you also have culture and communication issues. And I'm sure on the HR side, the number of now potential litigation and all of that stuff skyrockets, because
Mhm.
then I've got
Yeah.
performance improvement programs, I've
Mhm.
got wrongful termination lawsuits I got to deal with, I've
Mhm.
got toxic work environment, all of
Mhm.
that stuff. And so I think for us, well, first off, I want to say thank you for doing this. I really appreciate your point of view, and I think you bring a level of expertise on this that not everybody has. I really thank you also for, even though we didn't brief ahead of time, but you really landed on those key
No.
points that we think are absolutely critical about culture and trust. So thank you for that. And with that, maybe we can announce here on the call that we're starting a new series of podcasts that are specifically focused on AI and human resources work. And Kimberly is going to be a founding member of that, along with some of the other people that we work with. So for those of you listening, look forward, and we'll be publishing this under the SDS brand name and also putting this out in a separate channel on Spotify and YouTube.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Kimberly. And again, it's been a long time, but I'm really glad we reconnected, and congratulations on all the hard work and your success.
Thank you. I appreciate that.